Hello viewers, I'm SB and welcome to a Game of the Year list that definitely isn't coming out a full month later than I intended. Everybody talks about the year's games in the middle of the following February, right? Well, you know what, if not, I'm trend-setting. Everybody's going to be doing this in 5 years. Part of the problem is, I spent a while fighting with the form of this thing. I tried to wrestle it into numbers, which after a few hours of work turned out to be sheer madness. And then I thought, you know what, well maybe I'll just set it into tiers, like I did last year. I spent a while trying that, and honestly, there is just no axis on which I can meaningfully compare all the things on this list. Honestly, that was true last year, but it's even truer here. Like, in what way do you say that Doom Eternal is higher or lower on a list than Kentucky Route Zero, right? Like, what comparison can you even use? Putting these things into any kind of ranked order seems like an exercise in foolishness, so what I settled on is this. We're just going to talk about 10 games in alphabetical order, each of them powerful and wonderful in their own ways, each one of them the game of the year. So, first up. The magic of Blaseball, for me, isn't even really in the particulars of the game itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very into the otherworldliness and like the Night Vale-esque whimsical horror tone of the events. You know, I love a forbidden book that incinerates people, I love a player who is essentially a demonically possessed leather jacket, I love a pitching machine that runs on human blood. That's all, like, extremely my stuff. The individual player mechanics, the little things like buying upgrades and betting on games, aren't really terribly unique or interesting. What makes Blaseball special is the way that the developers and the players work together to craft the ongoing narrative and events of the game. The thing that it resembles most to me is a massive tabletop RPG, with the player base and the developers together building a story that none of them could have built alone. Like the story of Mike Townsend and Jalen Hotdog Fingers, with all of its twists and turns and incinerations and necromancy and remarkably good songs, is not something that was built and then handed to us by the game band. You know, I think they're as surprised and delighted by the way things unfold as the players are, and getting to be part of that is really special. I have never seen a large-scale collaborative narrative executed quite like this. And, of course, it doesn't hurt that, as I mentioned, the subject matter is extremely my jam. Blaseball is really something special, and when it probably comes back for a new season at the end of this month, I'd really recommend everyone check it out. You know, the tiger could always use a few more stripes. I debated about whether Caves of Qud should even be on this list, because as of the end of 2020 it hadn't actually come out yet, and I do want to give it a spot on the list for the year it comes out, because it's amazing, but I don't want to let one game crowd other stuff off of multiple years' lists, and, you know, I don't think game developers have really taken into account how much all of this early access stuff is screwing with the noble, hallowed, necessary tradition of Game of the Year lists. Anyway, I'm sure it's no spoiler to say that Hades is coming up later on this list, despite it also being on last year's, so I guess what I decided is that there are no rules and this is all made up anyway. Anyway, Caves of Qud is fucking weird, and that's really one of the highest compliments I can give. It is unapologetic in its weirdness, in its systemic commitment to weirdness. I love that it invites you into its world and just lets you wander and discover and get super murdered in so many different ways. I mean, one of the best parts of a game built around a detailed setting like this is uncovering and piecing together the story of that setting, which is why, in Caves of Qud, each playthrough having a procedurally generated history is such a brilliant touch. You know, the skeleton remains the same, but every new iteration gives you the opportunity to learn new tales and seek new secrets. There's enough possibility in the character systems that you can bring new types of characters into that infinite wilderness for a long time. It's a game where you can befriend a senate of dragons and use them to fight armies of hostile robots. It's a game where you can reasonably level up by entirely avoiding combat and just being the wasteland's best librarian. It's a game where you can defeat a lock by animating the door and making friends with it. It's a game where you can encounter your own alternate timeline twin, cut their face off, and then wear it over your own face. An action which all inhabitants of the game world universally agree makes you more charismatic. If you dig into Caves of Qud enough to begin understanding it, which, to be fair, does take some time and effort, you can have wildly varied adventures, unlike anything you're likely to see anywhere else. Look, here's what I have to say about Deep Rock Galactic. I'm a sucker for co-op shooters, and this is the best one since ever. Since ever. It might be the best one ever. Procedurally generated cave systems prevent the issue of gameplay growing stale, and the 4 classes feel meaningfully different while each manages to feel powerful and vital. One of the keys to the feel of playing Deep Rock is the incredible power that you have over the terrain. Each cave is mysterious and menacing when you arrive, but over the course of your half hour or so with it, you'll map and carve and build and make it into a space that works for you more than it works against you. The classes and weapons are designed in ways that give you a lot of interesting tactical decisions, and of course there's some simple lizard brain fun in gathering resources and watching all the little numbers go up. But also, the gameplay just feels good in a way that's tough to convey in words or footage. For my money, this is the best feeling play with your friends type game since Rocket League, which, yes, I am also still... Oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have looked at that. And they're still adding tons of content to it. One of the new mission types that they added a few months ago is good enough that I think it could be a whole game unto itself. And just a couple days ago, they added 2 whole new environment types full of their own flora and fauna and extremely weird alien everything. And it even works pretty well in single player due to the addition of a drone ally who can provide various kinds of assistance. And before we move on, I do want to call out one more specific thing. The way that Deep Rock Galactic uses darkness is particularly excellent. The darkness of Hoxus 4 presses in on you from all sides, suffocatingly, and managing light is critical. This is such a cool way of restricting information and making a player feel actually threatened by the melee-focused enemies, and it leads to some incredible feeling moments, like you hear a sound in the dark and throw a flare to reveal a writhing carpet of death spiders, and your heart drops into your stomach, and what an experience. This game rocks. Get it? Because it's mining and dwarves, and yeah. You know what else rocks? This seg into talking about how Doom Eternal is the best single-player shooter in years. A lot has been said about Doom Eternal's combat puzzle gameplay, which makes sense because it rules. You're constantly getting crushed and bleeding resources, so you must always be gaining resources, and the best way of gaining resources is aggression. So the game forces you to always be playing aggressively, which is brilliant for a lot of reasons. For one thing, it strongly incentivizes you to play in a way that's a lot of fun. A lot of shooters with cover mechanics and freely regenerating health encourage you to play very passively and do a lot of running and hiding, and I really appreciate Doom Eternal's commitment to the idea that if you want some health or ammo, you're going to have to go over there and rip it out of that demon. But there's more to the brilliance of that than just the game funneling you into the most fun way to play it. The fact that survival is killing mechanically incentivizes you to behave just like the Doom guy would. This is actual ludonarrative harmony. And, as a generally very lore-focused gamer, I loved the fact that the lore pages in the game are so bizarre and overwrought and baroque that you get 2 paragraphs into reading about yet another ancient king and you're just yeah, I don't want to be reading this, I want to be murdering. It's a brilliant way of matching your motivations with those of the character, right? It just jams you right into that big green helmet. It's better character work than you see in almost any AAA game, which, it's not a very high bar to cross, but still. And it's happening in Doom, of all places. And, of course, I love everything about the tone of the game. I love the flying gothic Doom castle, I love using a super BFG to shoot a hole in Mars, I love big glowy one-ups, I love people in-universe referring to your character as the Doom guy. And, of course, the music is just incredible because Mick Gordon is the best at what he does, and frankly, everyone at id should be ashamed of themselves for the nonsense that happened with the soundtrack. This video game knows it's a video game, and it likes everything about that. And that's wonderful. Doom Eternal is a big, stupid, brilliant experience, and I loved so much about it. Hey, surprise! Hades is very good. Look, I don't have a lot to say about this that hasn't already been said by everybody else on the internet. It's the most polished game in history, and it's brilliant and fun in almost every way. The character designs, and the writing, and the art, and the mechanics, and the voice acting, and the music, and the also everything else is incredible. I did have a moment's hesitation about including it again since it was on last year's list, but honestly, even just the parts of it that were added this year are better than almost everything else that came out. That's kind of a short section, but that's just all I have to say. Hades is really damn good, and there's no two ways about that. And it's not really a surprise, because Supergiant consistently knocks it out of the park. Speaking of which, everyone should go play Pyre. This section about Kentucky Route Zero might also be quite short, but for kind of a different reason. I feel almost completely unqualified to discuss this game. I don't know why exactly, but I think it's something to do with the size of my reaction to it, the magnitude of that. It affected me very deeply in a way that I haven't quite untangled yet. Unfortunately, I already had a lot of difficult feelings that I was working through, so these new ones had to sort of go in the queue. It's a beautiful, melancholy game that uses its interactivity in some really interesting ways in service of its themes, and unfortunately, I'm just not thoughtful enough to have anything intelligent to say about that yet. It feels like shooting off the cuff for 2 paragraphs is not up to the scale of the work here, I need some more time with this one. What I can tell you right now is that I feel lucky every time I get to play a game that provokes a reaction this powerful from me, even if I do wish those reactions could be a little more pleasant. Now, Mixolumia is a much easier thing for me to talk about. It's a Tetris. They did a Tetris. And I don't just mean that this is an abstract falling block puzzle game. I mean, it is that. But I also mean that, in much the same way as Tetris, it feels sort of perfect. Like, there's this seed of clever geometric design at the center of it. Simple, satisfying rules that produce a lot of strategic depth. It's just a lot of straightforward fun to split the diamonds and watch all the pieces fall into place, and there's a level of complexity in the way that the sliding behavior changes over time as your pile of pieces builds up. And the dynamic music system is certainly part of that perfect feeling. The music isn't actually mechanically relevant. I guess you could play the game on mute if you wanted to, but you'd be missing a brilliant layer of satisfaction. I really cannot recommend this highly enough. It just feels like it's exactly everything it needs to be and nothing else. It's small, but, like I said, perfect. Noita is everything I wanted from a successor to Spelunky, which I guess is kind of a weird thing to say both 12 years later and also in the year where an actual sequel to Spelunky came out. But here's what I mean. When Spelunky came out, it felt like a huge leap forward. It didn't invent procedural level generation or its style of heavily systems-based problem-solving, but the way it combined those things felt new and vital. The funny thing, I guess, is that for me, Spelunky 2 doesn't feel like another Spelunky precisely because it feels so much like another Spelunky. Noita, on the other hand, feels more like another Spelunky. I think the thing I'm really talking about here, that leap forward that I felt, is that the design of Spelunky opened up a new class of solutions for players to create. It's less static. You're not just using the tools you were explicitly given. You master the laws of this world's physics, and then you can use them to engineer answers to your problems. Again, it's not a new idea, but it's a more potent implementation of that idea than we'd had previously. And by working the world simulation systems all the way into every pixel of the procedurally generated terrain, and giving the players more tools to directly interact with the physical properties of the world, Noita has opened up another dimension of engineering. It's another huge step, and it lets you improvise some extraordinary ways to horribly kill yourself. And presumably you could also win, or something. Mostly I just get myself killed. Signs of the Sojourner is an absolute triumph of united narrative and mechanics. Most games treat narrative and dialogue as things that happen outside of the mechanics. Even games that pretend they care about talking often have little interest in making conversation part of the actual play space, and they use creaky 30-plus-year-old interaction mechanics for it, or sometimes even systems that are simplistic steps backward from 30-plus-year-old interaction mechanics. The Signs of the Sojourner is a game that actually cares about conversation, because it is a game that is actually about the way that people's love and anger and kindness and trauma refract through their interactions and spider out into those around them. The way people interact with each other changes everyone involved, on both large and small scales, and Signs of the Sojourner hardly has to spend any time talking about that, because you actually play that. Look, I'm trying really hard not to turn this into me trash-talking a lot of recent popular games by pointing out how miserably they fail in all of the ways that Signs of the Sojourner succeeds. In no small part, because I feel like doing that would sort of go against the feeling that Signs of the Sojourner is trying to impart. It's really hard, though. Let me focus instead on how, in addition to what I've just been saying, Signs of the Sojourner is beautiful. I'm not talking about aesthetics here, although I do love both the art and the music, but rather the things that the game believes and their complications and its refusal to commit to an easy and puerile grimness in the face of... well, I don't want to spoil anything about it by getting more detailed than that. Like, it only takes a few hours to play through it once, it's cheap, and if you bought that huge itch.io bundle earlier this year, you already have it. Signs of the Sojourner is definitely something you should play with your own hands. Tenderfoot Tactics is a brilliant tactical combat game. The game's combat hinges on geomantic magic that allows you to dynamically reshape terrain and introduce new elements, giving you some of that same solution engineering satisfaction that I was talking about with Noita. Encouraging plant growth to better spread fires, or creating moats to slow melee enemies while you shoot at them, or molding the ground to funnel water into enemy positions before you electrify it, is just a lot of fun. The design of the classes and abilities encourages thinking compositionally, not just at the party level, but at the character level, and it just feels good to build strategies here. But that's only one part of the package. Many of the game's classes are hidden within the world, so you're strongly incentivized to go exploring, and the way the world is rendered is pretty singular. You're a tiny part of a huge history, and from where you're standing, it's incomprehensible. You know, you can only perceive tiny pieces, what is very close to you, and the edges of what is far away, and the art of the world visually literalizes that. Every time you look around, you're reminded of how much you do not understand this place, how you can only orient yourself by the things that you understand as fixed, and move in relation to them. I can hardly put into words how much I love this. Tenderfoot Tactics is trying to make sense of existing in the shadow of something vast, and also it stars a crew of plucky goblins, which is always worth at least a couple of points in my book. And that's my 10. Just like last year, I somehow resisted the urge to spend the whole time talking about Rocket League. This has taken me forever to get out, so I'm not going to try to write some grand conclusion. I'm just going to say that once again, I got to spend a year doing this thanks to the support of many, many people in many, many ways, and I am unexpressibly grateful for that fact. Thank you very much for watching and donating and commenting and recommending and all of the other things that you people have done that have kept me afloat throughout 2020. And I hope that we can all look forward to a 2021 that has just as many wonders in store and maybe somewhat less of the other stuff. Join me again on Monday for something new, and we'll see you then.